Morning came early to the bakery on the edge of a tired industrial town in western Pennsylvania. The windows were still dark with frost when Ellie Novak stepped inside, the bell over the door chiming softly behind her. The air already smelled of yeast and heat, a comforting mix that clung to the walls and the back of her throat. She tied on her apron, washed her hands, and moved to her station without a word. As she always did, a thin scarf was wrapped around her head and neck, knotted with care. It was practical, she told herself. The ovens ran hot. Drafts slipped through the old brick walls. But everyone there knew the truth. Ellie kept her face hidden because it was easier than watching people look. She worked steadily, shaping dough with practiced movements. Her hands knew what to do even when her mind drifted. The rhythm of the bakery carried her forward. Weigh, fold, turn, slide the trays, check the timers. She kept her eyes down. Silence had become second nature to her, a habit formed over years like breathing. Someone noticed the bruise anyway. A glance held too long. A pause in conversation. A quiet shift in the room. Sympathy moved through the bakery in the same way the warmth did. Slowly, invisibly, settling into every corner. No one said anything at first. They rarely did. Pity could be as uncomfortable as curiosity. Veronica Hale did not believe in either. She was taller than most of them, broad-shouldered, with a voice that carried even when she spoke softly. She set a tray into the oven, shut the heavy door, and turned to Ellie with a look that was not gentle, but honest. "Did he do it again?" Veronica asked. The words landed without ceremony. No whisper, no sugarcoating. Ellie's hands stilled for a moment, just long enough to be noticeable. She did not look up. She did not answer right away. When she finally nodded, it was small, almost imperceptible, as if she were confirming the weather rather than admitting harm. Veronica exhaled sharply through her nose. "You don't have to keep living like this," she said, quieter now. Ellie pressed her lips together. The answer rose in her chest, familiar and heavy. But she swallowed it down. There were things that could not be explained in a room full of warm ovens and watching eyes. As she reached for a bowl, the scarf slipped. It happened quickly. A corner loosened, fabric sliding just enough to expose the truth she worked so hard to keep hidden. A jagged line of scar tissue ran along one side of her face, pale and uneven, stretching from her temple down toward her jaw. Skin that had healed, but never forgotten. The room went still. Ellie noticed, of course. She always did. She calmly lifted her hand and pulled the scarf back into place, fingers steady, movements practiced. No rush, no apology, no embarrassment left to give. She had learned long ago that reacting only made things worse. Inside there was no anger, no shock, only a deep, tired resignation. Pain had become a constant companion, something she carried quietly, the way others carried keys or wallets. She endured because endurance was what she knew. Silence because it was safer than hope. Ellie returned to her work. The dough waited. The ovens needed watching. Life, as it always had, went on. And with it, the quiet story of a woman who had survived pain for so long that even suffering no longer surprised her. The fire came back to Ellie in fragments, never all at once. It returned in the smell of smoke caught in winter coats, in the crackle of burning wood, in the way her heart still raced when she heard sirens in the distance. Years had passed, but the memory refused to fade, as if it had etched itself into her skin along with the scars. That night, she had been 6 months pregnant. She remembered unlocking the front door and being met not by silence but by heat. Thick, choking smoke rolled out into the cold air, stinging her eyes and filling her lungs. Somewhere inside, something collapsed with a violent crash. Ellie froze for a heartbeat, instinct screaming at her to run, to turn back, to think of the child growing inside her. Then she heard Brian. His voice was barely there, slurred and distant, coming from somewhere deeper in the house. He had been drinking again. She knew that even before she saw him. The bottles, the smell, the way he laughed too loudly earlier that evening. It all came rushing back in an instant. She did not call for help. She did not wait. Ellie wrapped her coat tighter around her belly and ran inside. The fire had already spread through the living room. Flames climbed the curtains, devouring everything in their path. The heat pressed against her like a wall, and each breath burned. She moved blindly, guided by memory and desperation, calling Brian's name until her throat ached. She found him on the floor, unconscious, surrounded by smoke and fallen debris. He did not stir when she shook him. Panic rose sharp and sudden, but she pushed it down. There was no time for fear, only action. Somehow, she dragged him toward the door. Her hand slipped. Her vision blurred. At one point, she felt searing pain along the side of her face as something collapsed, sending a burst of heat and sparks across her skin. She screamed, but she did not stop. Neighbors later said they saw her stagger out of the house, coughing, her hair singed, her face blistered, pulling a grown man behind her while clutching her stomach with the other hand. The rest came in pieces. The hospital lights, the sterile smell, doctors speaking in urgent, measured tones, worry over the baby, weeks of recovery that felt like months. When Evan was born early, small but breathing, strong enough to cry, Ellie wept with relief she could barely contain. Brian survived too. Ellie's face did not heal the same way. The burns left permanent scars along one side, skin that tightened and pulled in unfamiliar ways. Mirrors became something to avoid. Strangers stared. Children asked questions. Brian never did. After the fire, with the house gone and bills piling up, there was only one place to go. They moved in with Brian's mother, into an apartment that never quite felt like home. Ellie slept in a small room with Evan's crib pressed close to the bed. Brian took the couch. Ellie depended on them then, for shelter, for help, for survival. And with that dependence came something heavier, guilt. Brian reminded her often that she had saved him, that he would have died without her. The words were not spoken with gratitude, but with expectation, obligation, as if her sacrifice had bound her to him forever. Ellie believed it. She told herself that leaving would make everything she endured meaningless, that she owed him her patience, her silence, her strength. And so the fire became more than a memory. It became the foundation of a marriage she could not escape, built on scars, fear, and a quiet belief that she no longer had the right to choose herself. Brian's mother died quietly, the way people often said they hoped to, seated in her favorite chair by the window, hands folded in her lap, heart simply giving out without warning. There was no dramatic farewell, no final conversation. One day she was there, criticizing the way Ellie folded laundry or fed the baby, and the next, the apartment felt hollow and strangely too large. The funeral passed in a blur of dark coats and murmured condolences. Brian stood stiffly beside the grave, his face unreadable. Ellie held Evan close, shielding him from the cold wind and from questions he was too young to understand. When it was over, they returned to the apartment alone, carrying boxes of belongings that no one quite knew what to do with. For a while, something in Brian seemed to change. He found work with a small construction company, doing renovation jobs around the county. The hours were long, the pay modest, but it was steady. He came home tired instead of drunk. He talked about foremen and deadlines, complained about his back and the cold. Ellie listened. She cooked dinner. Evan grew, learning to walk between the narrow rooms of the apartment. Those months felt almost normal. Ellie allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that the worst was behind them, that the fire, the scars, the shouting nights, all of it had been a phase they had survived together. She did not speak this hope aloud. She barely admitted it to herself, but it was there, fragile and quiet, like a candle sheltered from the wind. Then Brian started drinking again. At first, it was just a beer after work, then a few on weekends. Ellie noticed a change before he did. The way his voice grew sharper, the way his patience thinned. Missed mornings turned into missed shifts. Arguments with supervisors followed. One afternoon, he came home earlier than usual, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched. He had been fired. After that, the days blurred together. Brian slept late, drank earlier, grew angry faster. Job searches lasted a week, sometimes less, always ending with excuses. His back hurt. His boss had it out for him. The work was beneath him. There was always a reason. Ellie returned to the bakery full-time. Her mornings started before dawn. Her evenings ended with sore feet and aching shoulders. The pay was small, but it kept the lights on. It paid for groceries, diapers, winter boots for Evan. Brian contributed nothing. Still, he complained constantly about the food, the noise, the way Ellie walked, the way she spoke, the way she looked. Money became another weapon. He demanded to know how much she earned, where every dollar went. He accused her of hiding things, of wasting what little they had. When she came home exhausted, flowers still clinging to her sleeves, he mocked her work as meaningless. "Anyone can bake bread," he said. "Is that all you're good for?" Ellie learned to keep her head down. The insults grew more personal over time. Brian's eyes lingered on her scars longer than before. Sometimes, in the middle of an argument, he would gesture toward her face with a cruel half-smile, as if reminding her of something she could never forget. "You should be grateful," he told her once. "After everything. Someone like you doesn't get many options." Ellie said nothing. Her quiet strength, the way she endured without breaking, only seemed to fuel his resentment. The more she carried, the smaller he felt. And instead of rising to meet her, Brian chose to drag her down, one word at a time. Their marriage no longer had ground beneath it. It floated on bitterness, imbalance, and fear, held together not by love, but by habit, obligation, and the unspoken belief that this was simply how things were meant to be. Ellie came home late that night, the kind of late that settled deep into her bones. The bakery had been short-staffed again, and she had stayed without being asked, finishing trays, scrubbing counters, doing what needed to be done. By the time she unlocked the apartment door, the hallway lights flickered and the building smelled faintly of damp concrete and old cooking oil. Brian was already awake. He sat at the small kitchen table, a half-empty bottle within reach, his chair tipped back against the wall. The television murmured from the living room, but he wasn't watching it. His attention fixed on Ellie the moment she stepped inside, eyes narrowing as if he had been waiting. She set her bag down and moved straight to the stove. There was no greeting. There never was. She reheated what she had prepared earlier, vegetable stew, thickened with potatoes and carrots. It was simple, filling. The kind of meal she could stretch over 2 days if she had to. Brian watched her in silence until she placed the bowl in front of him. He lifted the spoon, sniffed once, then let it drop back into the bowl with a sharp clink. "What is this?" "Stew," Ellie said quietly. "It's hot." "Where's the meat?" He pushed the bowl away with his fingertips, as if it offended him. Ellie opened the refrigerator and looked inside, even though she already knew what she would find. "There isn't any," she said. "I'll buy some after my next shift." Brian laughed, short and humorless. "So there's money for nothing but not for meat?" Ellie turned slowly. "What do you mean?" He reached into the trash and pulled out a crumpled candy wrapper, holding it up between 2 fingers. "This," he said. "This kind of garbage. You can buy this, but not food." "A co-worker gave it to Evan," Ellie replied. "I didn't buy it." Brian scoffed. "Convenient." The word hung in the air. Ellie felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the warning sign she had learned to recognize. She lowered herself onto the chair across from him, hands folded in her lap. "I'm doing the best I can," she said. "You know that. That's your best." He gestured toward the pot on the stove. No wonder we're stuck like this. Something inside her shifted. It wasn't anger. It was exhaustion. You could help, she said. If you worked. Brian's face hardened. Here we go. I'm not asking for much, Ellie continued. Just something. Anything. We can't keep living like this. He leaned forward, eyes cold. Don't talk to me about living. You think you're some kind of hero. Ellie's hands tightened together. I saved your life, she said before she could stop herself. You wouldn't be here if it weren't for me. I ran into that house. I never asked you to. Brian cut in. The words landed harder than any blow. Ellie stared at him, unsure she had heard correctly. What? I didn't ask you to save me, he repeated, his voice flat, almost bored. If I burned, that would have been my problem. You chose that. Her breath caught. Memories surged uninvited. The heat, the smoke, the pain that never quite left her. She reached up without thinking, fingers brushing the edge of her scarf. Brian noticed. He smiled then, slow and cruel. You should look in the mirror sometime, he said. See what you turned yourself into. Don't act like you did it for me. Ellie stood. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor, the sound sharp in the small kitchen. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Brian watched her with open disdain, as if daring her to respond. This was no longer anger. It was contempt. Ellie understood that then. Whatever fragile thread had held their marriage together, guilt, fear, habit had finally snapped. The man sitting across from her no longer saw her as a person, or even as someone he needed. She was a reminder of his weakness, of his dependence, of a debt he refused to acknowledge. And in that moment, something inside Ellie broke free. The night did not end there, but the marriage, as it had been, did. The bakery closed on a gray afternoon, the kind that pressed low against the town and made even familiar streets feel uncertain. Ellie had known something was wrong the moment she was called into the small office at the back, the one that smelled faintly of coffee and old paperwork. The owner sat behind the desk, her hands folded too tightly, her face pale in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. She spoke slowly, choosing her words with care. There had been a diagnosis. Serious. Treatment would be long and expensive. The bakery would be sold. Operations would stop immediately. There were apologies, quiet regrets, promises to write references if Ellie needed them. Ellie nodded through it all. She thanked her employer. She gathered her things. She stepped back out into the cold with her last paycheck folded neatly in her coat pocket and the strange sensation that the ground beneath her feet had shifted. The walk home felt longer than usual. By the time she reached the apartment, dusk had settled, and the lights in the windows across the street flickered on one by one. Brian was there, sitting on the couch, a bottle in his hand, his boots still on the carpet. Ellie stood in the doorway for a moment, steadying herself. There's something I need to tell you, she said. Brian didn't look up. What now? She took a breath. The bakery closed. The owner is sick. There's no work anymore. She expected silence, or maybe concern, fear at least, something human. Instead, Brian shot to his feet. What do you mean, no work? He demanded. You're kidding. I'm not, Ellie said. I didn't know until today. His face twisted, anger flaring fast and bright. So that's it. You just come home and tell me we're broke. We're not broke yet, she said carefully. We still have some savings. And in what? Brian cut in. You think that'll last? Ellie straightened. We can manage, but you need to find a job. We can't live on nothing. The room went very still. Brian stared at her, eyes narrowing, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then he laughed, loud and sharp, the sound bouncing off the walls. He said, You want me to work? Yes, Ellie replied. Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze. We need it. Evan needs it. At the mention of their son, something in Brian snapped. Don't bring him into this, he snarled. Who says he's even mine? The words struck like a slap. Ellie felt the blood drain from her face. What did you say? Brian stepped closer, his breath heavy with alcohol. Maybe you got bored while I was working. Maybe you found someone else. Ever think about that? That's not true, Ellie said, her voice breaking. You know it isn't. Do I? He shot back. Maybe we should get one of those tests. Prove it. The room seemed to tilt. Years of silence, of endurance, of swallowing every insult piled up inside her all at once. Before she could think, before fear could stop her, Ellie raised her hand. The slap echoed in the small living room. Brian froze for a split second, his eyes wide with disbelief. Then his face darkened. You think you can hit me, he said quietly. He lunged. Ellie barely had time to react before his hands were around her throat. The force knocked the air from her lungs, panic exploding in her chest. She clawed at his wrists, her feet scrambling against the floor as he pushed her backward. Stop, she tried to say, but no sound came out. Pressure built. The room blurred at the edges. Her thoughts scattered. Flashes of Evan's face, the bakery ovens, the fire from years ago, all blending together. She felt herself weakening, her hands growing numb. Then, just as suddenly, Brian let go. Ellie collapsed to the floor, coughing violently, gasping for air as her body shook. Brian stood over her, breathing hard, his expression unreadable. She lay there for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, the truth settling in with brutal clarity. This was the line, the point beyond return. Whatever fear had kept her there, whatever guilt had bound her to him, it no longer mattered. The world she had been clinging to had fallen apart, and nothing would ever be the same again. Ellie did not scream. She did not cry. She moved through the apartment with a strange, hollow calm, as if her body were acting on instructions given long ago. She went into the bedroom, closed the door behind her, and pulled a worn duffel bag from the closet. Into it went the essentials, warm clothes for Evan, a sweater for herself, a few diapers, documents folded carefully and tucked into an inner pocket. She worked quietly, deliberately, afraid that if she hurried, fear might catch up with her. Brian watched from the doorway, arms crossed. You think you're leaving? He asked, his voice thick with scorn. Ellie did not answer. She zipped the bag and lifted Evan from his bed. The boy stirred, blinking sleep from his eyes, confused by the sudden movement and the tension in the room. Mom, he murmured. It's okay, she whispered, pressing her cheek to his hair. Just stay close. Brian stepped forward and blocked the door. You don't get to take him, he said. Where are you even going? Ellie looked at him then, really looked. There was no pleading in her eyes, no explanation left to give. She shifted Evan higher on her hip and waited. Brian laughed, harsh and loud. Fine, go, he said, stepping aside. But don't expect anything from me. As she reached for the door, he added, You know no one's waiting for you out there. The words followed her into the hallway. You think anyone wants you like this, he called after her. Look at your face. Look at yourself. You're lucky I ever kept you. Ellie paused just for a second. Her hand tightened on the door handle. Then she opened it and stepped out into the stairwell without looking back. The cold hit them immediately. Winter had settled hard over the town, the kind of cold that cut through coats and found bare skin in seconds. Snow had piled along the sidewalks, crusted over with ice. Ellie adjusted the scarf around her face and pulled Evan's hat lower over his ears. She checked her pockets once, out of habit, even though she already knew they were empty. There was no money, no car, no plan beyond one fragile idea. Veronica lived outside town, beyond the last stretch of streetlights, near the edge of the highway. Ellie had never walked that far before, but she knew the direction. She started down the road, Evan's small hand tucked into hers. At first, the walk felt manageable. The cold was sharp but bearable, and Evan talked quietly about things that made little sense. His favorite toy, a dog he'd seen once, the promise of hot chocolate that Ellie told him waited somewhere ahead. She answered him softly, her breath fogging the air. As they left the town behind, the wind picked up. Snow blew across the road in thin sheets, stinging her eyes. Cars passed occasionally, headlights flashing by too fast to notice them standing at the shoulder. Ellie lifted her free hand, trying to flag one down, but none slowed. The distance stretched. Evan's steps grew shorter, uneven. "I'm tired," he said, his voice small. "I know," Ellie replied, forcing a smile he could not see beneath the scarf. "We'll rest soon." But rest never came. The cold deepened, creeping into her boots, numbing her toes. Evan began to stumble, his hand slipping from hers. She scooped him up, ignoring the protest in her muscles, and carried him the rest of the way. By the time she reached the deserted bus stop, her legs were trembling. The shelter stood empty, its glass walls rimmed with frost. Ellie lowered herself onto the bench, pulling Evan close, wrapping her coat around him as best she could. His breathing slowed, shallow and uneven. She shook him gently. "Don't sleep," she whispered. "Just a little longer, okay?" Her own vision blurred. The cold felt distant now, strangely muted. Ellie leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes for just a moment, telling herself it was only to gather strength. Darkness crept in at the edges. The last thing she felt was Evan's small body pressed against her chest, his warmth fading. As the world slipped quietly out of reach, the sound reached Ellie before the light did, a low engine rumble cutting through the wind, steady and close. Headlights swept across the snow and briefly filled the bus shelter with white glare. The truck slowed. Tires crunched over ice. Then everything went quiet. A door opened. Michael Turner saw them the moment he stepped out of the cab. Two figures huddled together on the bench. One woman, one child. So still they looked like part of the frozen landscape. Steam barely lifted from their mouths. The woman's head had slumped to one side, her arms wrapped around the boy with instinctive determination. "Hey," he called out, his voice sharp with urgency. "Hey, can you hear me?" No response. Michael closed the distance in long strides, boots slipping slightly on the packed snow. He knelt, touching the woman's shoulder, then the child's cheek. Both were ice cold, too cold. The boy's lips were pale, his eyelids fluttering. "Damn it," Michael muttered. He didn't waste time asking questions. He shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around the child first, lifting him carefully. The boy stirred weakly, a small sound escaping his throat. Michael took that as a good sign, barely but enough. He turned back for the woman, sliding one arm behind her shoulders, the other under her knees. She was lighter than he expected. Too late. Her breath was shallow, uneven. "Stay with me," he said, more command than comfort. The warmth of the truck hit them like a wave. Michael laid the boy across the passenger seat, turning the heat up full, then settled the woman beside him, buckling her in so she wouldn't slump. He grabbed a thermos from behind the seat, unscrewed the lid with stiff fingers, and poured steaming liquid into the cap. "Easy," he said, holding it to the woman's lips. "Just a little." She swallowed reflexively, coughed once, then again. Color returned slowly to her cheeks. Michael shifted his attention to the boy, coaxing him to drink, rubbing his hands, keeping him awake. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the engine and the howl of the wind outside. When the woman finally opened her eyes, confusion clouded them. She tried to sit up, panic flickering briefly before exhaustion dragged her back. "You're safe," Michael said quickly. "You and your boy. Just breathe." Her gaze drifted to the child. "Evan," she whispered hoarsely. "He's here," Michael assured her. "He's okay." The relief that crossed her face was immediate and devastating. Tears welled up, but she didn't let them fall. She never did. They drove for a while before she spoke again. Her voice was quiet, steady in a way that suggested long practice. She told him what had happened, not all at once. Not dramatically. Just facts. The argument, the cold, the walk, the bus stop. Michael listened without interruption. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as she spoke. The muscles in his jaw flexed, a visible effort to keep his anger contained. When she mentioned the choking, his breath left him in a slow, controlled exhale. Some people shouldn't be allowed near anyone, he said finally. Not loudly, not violently, just with certainty. She said nothing. She didn't need agreement, only space to be heard. The truck turned off the highway onto a narrower road, dark and lined with trees heavy with snow. The headlights carved a tunnel through the night. The woman, Ellie, she told him, watched the unfamiliar landscape pass by, too tired to be afraid. I've got a place, Michael said. A farm. It's not fancy, but it's warm. You can stay for the night. Longer if you need. She hesitated. Old instincts rose, distrust, caution, the weight of needing help. Then Evan stirred, reaching for her hand. Okay, she whispered. The truck rolled on, leaving the empty bus stop behind. The danger wasn't gone. Nothing was certain. But for the first time that night, the cold loosened its grip. Fragile safety had found them, and for now it was enough. Morning on the farm arrived quietly. There were no sirens, no shouting voices through thin apartment walls, no footsteps pacing in anger. Ellie woke to the low sounds of animals and the muted creak of a house settling into the cold. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then she saw Evan asleep beside her, wrapped in borrowed blankets, his cheeks warm and pink again, and the memory of the night before returned. Michael had already been up for hours. He showed them around after breakfast, nothing formal, nothing overwhelming, just the basics, where the bathroom was, where the kitchen stayed stocked, which doors to keep closed against the wind. He spoke plainly without expectation, as if their presence required no explanation. The farm stretched wide behind the house, fields resting under snow, barns dark against the pale sky. Cows moved slowly inside their shelter, breath rising in soft clouds. The place felt solid, grounded, real. You can stay, Michael said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As long as you need. Ellie thanked him, the words heavy in her throat. Later that day, after Evan had settled in with crayons at the kitchen table, Michael brought up work. One of the dairy hands had recently left on maternity leave. The job wasn't complicated, he explained. Early mornings, routine. He offered training, steady pay, and a small room in the house so Ellie wouldn't need to worry about rent. Ellie hesitated. She had never worked on a farm. The animals intimidated her. The responsibility did too. She had spent so long being told what she wasn't capable of that the idea of being trusted with something real felt unfamiliar. I can't promise I'll be good at it, she said. Michael shrugged. No one is at first. There was no pressure in his voice, no hidden demand, just an offer. She accepted. The women at the farm welcomed her without questions. They showed her how to move calmly around the animals, how to work with steady hands and patient steps. When Ellie made mistakes, they corrected her without judgment. When she grew tired, they told her to rest. No one stared at her scars. No one asked why she had left or what had happened before. They treated her as if she belonged there, as if she always had. Time passed in small, meaningful ways. Ellie grew stronger. Her hands toughened. Her back ached at night in the honest way that came from work, not fear. She earned her own money again. Saw the quiet pride in Evan's eyes when she returned from the barns, smelling of hay and soap instead of smoke and flour. Independence returned slowly, like feeling in a limb that had gone numb. Michael remained steady in the background. He worked alongside her, never above her, never too close. Their conversations were simple at first, whether animals or pears. Over time, they stretched into longer talks over evening tea. Shared silences by the window when snow fell thick and heavy. There was no rush, no demands. Trust grew where fear once lived. Nearly a year passed before Ellie realized how different her life had become. The farm had expanded, new equipment, more animals, plans taking shape for spring. Evan laughed more, slept better. So did she. When Michael asked her to marry him, there was no grand gesture, just a quiet question one evening after dinner, spoken with the same calm certainty he brought to everything else. Ellie said yes. By the time winter returned, she was carrying another child. This time there was no panic, no guilt, no fire haunting her dreams, only cautious hope and a sense of belonging she had never known before. The farm asked nothing of her that she could not give, and in return it gave her something she thought she had lost forever, herself. The knock came after dark, when the farm had settled into its nightly quiet. Snow fell steadily, thick flakes drifting down under the yellow glow of the yard lights. Inside the house, Ellie was folding laundry while Evan worked on a puzzle at the table, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. Michael was outside, finishing the last check of the barns before turning in. The dogs heard it first. A low growl rolled through the yard, followed by sharp, insistent barking. Michael straightened, one hand already moving toward the gate as he scanned the road beyond the fence. The dogs strained at their chains, hackles raised, bodies taut with warning. "Easy," Michael muttered, though his own posture had gone rigid. A figure stood just beyond the gate, hunched against the cold. The man raised a hand slowly, as if afraid of startling the animals. His coat was thin and torn, boots cracked and soaked through. Snow clung to his shoulders and beard. He swayed slightly, exhaustion written into every line of his body. "Please," the man called, his voice hoarse. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need some help." Michael stepped closer, his expression hardening. He had seen enough winters to recognize desperation when it stood in front of him. He reached for the latch, then paused as movement behind him caught his attention. Ellie had come out onto the porch. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself, the cold biting through the fabric as she peered into the darkness. At first, she saw only a stranger, ragged, broken, barely standing. Then the man lifted his head. Recognition hit her like a physical blow. "Brian," she said softly. The name fell into the snow between them. Brian Novak's eyes widened. For a moment, hope flickered across his face, quickly followed by shame. He looked smaller than she remembered, thinner. His shoulders slumped as if the weight of everything he had lost had finally caught up with him. "I didn't know where else to go," he said, stepping closer to the gate before thinking better of it. The dogs lunged, barking furiously. Brian stumbled back, raising his hands. I heard you were here." Michael turned sharply to Ellie. "You know him?" She nodded once. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but her voice remained steady. "He's my ex-husband." Understanding crossed Michael's face, followed by something darker. His jaw clenched. Without a word, he reached toward the chains. Ellie moved instantly. "Michael," she said, sharper now. "Don't." Brian saw the gesture and broke completely. He dropped to his knees in the snow, hands pressed together as if in prayer. Tears streaked down his dirt-streaked face, freezing where they fell. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I lost everything. I was stupid. I was drunk. I didn't know what I was doing. Please, Ellie, I'll do anything. I just need help. I'm freezing." The power had shifted so completely it was almost unrecognizable. Once he had stood over her, mocking her scars, her worth, her future. Now he knelt before her, shaking, broken, begging for mercy. Ellie felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a deep, quiet clarity. Michael hesitated, muscles tense, waiting for her word. Ellie stepped down from the porch, stopping just short of the gate. She looked at Brian for a long moment, really looked at him. Not the man he had been to her, not the fear he once inspired, but what stood there now, a consequence, not a threat. "Get up," she said finally. Brian obeyed immediately, scrambling to his feet. "You can come in," Ellie continued. "Just for tonight." Michael's eyes flicked to her face, searching for doubt. He found none. They gave Brian food. Hot soup, bread, water. Clean clothes pulled from old storage. Michael showed him a small room near the barn where the heat worked and a blanket waited. Nothing more. No promises. No forgiveness spoken aloud. As the door closed behind him, Ellie stood quietly beside Michael, listening to the wind move through the trees. The night held no anger now, only boundaries. And for the first time, Ellie understood what real power felt like. Dawn came slowly over the farm, the sky paling from black to gray as the night released its hold. Snow lay undisturbed across the fields, smooth and quiet, as if nothing had happened at all. Ellie stood at the kitchen window with a mug warming her hands, watching the light creep in. Brian left without saying goodbye. She saw him from a distance, walking unsteadily down the long drive with a small bundle slung over his shoulder. The clothes were clean now, his steps a little steadier, but nothing else had changed. There was no car waiting for him, no destination in sight, only the road and whatever consequences followed him along it. Ellie did not call out. She did not wave. She did not turn away either. She simply watched until he disappeared beyond the trees. There was no satisfaction in seeing him go, no surge of triumph, no sense of justice finally served. What she felt instead was quieter, an ending without drama, without violence, without the noise she had once thought revenge required. Michael came up behind her, resting a hand lightly at her back. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was shared. Ellie took a breath and let it out slowly. She had once believed that freedom would come from confrontation, from shouting back, from making Brian feel what she had felt. For a long time, she had imagined justice as something loud and visible, something that would finally balance the scales. But standing there now, she understood the truth. Her freedom had not come from punishing him. It had come from leaving, from surviving the night she should not have survived, from walking into the cold with nothing but her child and her will to protect him, from working with her hands, earning her place, building a life that did not depend on fear, from learning, slowly and painfully, that she did not owe her suffering to anyone. Michael took her mug from her hands and set it aside. Without a word, he lifted her into his arms. The gesture surprised her even now. He carried her across the threshold of their home, steady and careful, just as he had on the night he first brought her here. Half frozen, barely conscious, still bound to a past she couldn't yet see her way out of. This time was different. She laughed softly, resting her head against his shoulder as he set her down inside the warmth of the house. The smell of breakfast drifted from the stove. Evan's footsteps thudded down the stairs, already asking questions, already alive with the certainty of a safe morning. Ellie closed her eyes for a moment and let herself feel it all. Safety, work, time. These were the things that had rebuilt her dignity, not apologies, not revenge, not seeing someone else fall. Mercy, she realized, was not weakness. It was choice, the choice to stop carrying hatred. The choice to draw a line and step back from it. The choice to move forward without becoming what had once hurt her. For those listening to her story, Ellie's journey left a simple truth behind. Abuse does not always end with confrontation. Often it ends with escape. Dignity is not reclaimed overnight, but rebuilt through safety, honest work, and time. And mercy, when freely chosen, is not surrender. It is strength. If this story resonated with you, consider sharing your thoughts in the comments. What helped you survive? What did forgiveness or letting go mean in your own life? Sometimes quiet strength speaks the loudest.